Hiya, I can see we have a few attendees on. We're just waiting for a couple of the panelists to join us. Alex Sobel should be here shortly, and one of the other panelists, Ralph Berry, he's going to be a little bit late, and we are aware of that, but we'll get started as soon as Alex joins on. So basically, tonight's panel, thank you very much, Leon, for inviting me to chair this. We'll be discussing the self-left in their own words. Any of you who are on Twitter will be very, very aware that it's a cause of many arguments and blog pieces and debates, and we've been variously accused as being, you know, enablers of the left and Blairites sort of sitting in the middle or taking one side. So we thought it would sort of be useful to have an event where we sort of chat about what exactly the term sort of soft left means, chatting quite a bit through the sort of vision of open labour, which the panelists tonight will all have some experience on, as the sort of most recent emanation of the soft left. Obviously, it's something that's actually been around for quite a while. So I do believe, okay, someone just written red Tories in the chat. Oh, he's been removed, thank you. Okay, so you are very, very welcome to ask questions and make comments in the chat. I'd rather you weren't offensive, but if you are, yeah, you might get removed. I understand the Young Fabians has safe space policy. Okay, I don't want to start properly until we have all of the attendees, or sorry, all of the panelists, but also I don't want to sort of sit and wait and sort of have you just stare at me rambling on. So what I sort of propose doing, Jade, if you're okay with it, is to sort of start by directing some questions at you, and then whenever Alex and Ralph join in, then we can direct the questions at them as well. Are you sort of okay?
No pressure.
So Jade Azim, who is one of the panelists this evening, is an activist currently doing an MA and used to be on the Open Labour Committee. The other panelists who will be joining, I'll introduce them briefly when they're here, but so we don't sort of interrupt any sort of flow, we'll be joined by Alex Sobel, who is MP for Leeds North. It's North, right? Yeah. And Ralph Berry, who is a councillor in Bradford. All have been involved sort of in open labour and various soft left movements throughout the history of the party. So just to clarify, whenever someone writes in the chat, can only we see it, or can all of the attendees see it? I don't know who can sort of answer that.
It very much depends on whether on the drop-down menu you select all panelists or all panelists and attendees, and
oh, okay. Okay, that's fine. If you do have any questions, you can pop them in as a question for all panelists, ideally, so I'll be able to see them. Just so we sort of don't interrupt the flow, if you send things through, then I'm more than happy to sort of ask those questions. I mean, ideally, it would be best if you could do it on the little Q&A tab, which you can see should be at the bottom sort of center if you're on a computer. I'm not sure where it is on a phone, but it should be sort of fine to see it. So if you ask it in the little Q&A, then I'll sort of bank them up. But before we sort of go into, although actually the first question that's just come through by Thomas Plater, I think is probably quite a good one to actually kick things off. So I might sort of bank what I was going to ask and start with that one, because I think it's quite a good one. Jade, if you want to start, and I'll put it to the others, what in your opinion is the most defining factor of the soft left, or does it have a defining factor?
Wow. So I thought about this on defining the soft left, and I don't think there's a singular defining factor. I would probably put it down to three that probably define it from either its left or its right. I see it as being sort of committed to socialism, but parliamentary socialism. So it's very much not so much the gradualists of the Fabians, but certainly the parliamentary route to socialism. I see it as being internationalist, though certainly not necessarily interventionist nor non-interventionist. It will always be quite nuanced in that regard, but certainly approaching sort of multilateralism, as you'd anticipate, being pro-Europe and pro sort of reaching out to international partners and comrades. And I also see it as plural, and I think that's where it gets a lot of its people worrying about what it actually stands for. But the way that I see it is that pluralism in the Labour Party is just a recognition that people can coexist, although in that regard, at least not being tolerant of intolerance. So pluralism, parliamentary socialism, and internationalism. I would say it's three defining tenets.
Thank you. I mean, I know that I'm sort of chairing and not speaking as much, but it's absolutely something that I think I would agree with loosely what I think that the soft left means, and definitely the sort of, those are the principles that got me to be more involved in open labour. I have also just got a text through from Alex, who thought it was at 7:30, but he's going to be joining us as soon as possible. So we will have Ralph Berry popping in a moment. But yeah, for now, we have the wonderful Jade, who I'm sure is enjoying having a little Q&A and having the entire weight of the soft left put on her. I mean, before then I go into questions, actually, because we don't have all the panelists, I don't know, Jade, if you have anything that you were sort of specifically wanting to chat about, or anything that you think is important, as you've got a bit more space now with just you on.
I think obviously NEC elections open, they're very hard to avoid. I think that being involved in open labour very much since its infancy, it's been quite interesting to see it grow to a state where it can make the recommendations it has. I certainly think in recent times it's shown a strengthening, and I think that during these NEC elections we may see that come to fruition. So obviously not prematurely, but I think that the debate is very much based on the soft left, because the soft left is in a sense of an insurgency. I think that's certainly something to consider.
Yeah, and I mean, talking about NEC elections, I mean, I'm sure we will discuss it more than when the others come on. And I don't imagine people are going to have very different opinions, but you were sort of involved in open labour for quite a while, and the campaign for STV is something that they've been pushing at. So, I mean, how have you sort of seen that campaign change? And I mean, obviously you're happy, I assume, that it's come to fruition, but I mean, what have you sort of seen in that campaign? How'd we get there?
So I think that I was always someone that when picking slates, I was always a mixed slate kind of girl. I think we all were really in that regard. And I think STV shows that you don't really have to consider whether one or the other gains complete hegemony. In this instance, you can now have variance and you can have a multitude of opinions rather than an entire slate sweeping clean. I think that's always very healthy for the Labour Party. And I think it's going to have a major impact on the NEC elections in a good way, in a healthy way.
I was going to see if anyone had any questions about STV, but we do have another question through. I am sorry they're all going to you, Jade. I'll allow you to skip a couple later if you'd like. But I mean, the question that's just come through is the self-left just an extension of Milibandism? And what weight do you give to the sentiment that the majority of Labour members would define themselves as self-left, but that the group itself is unorganisable? Two quite big questions, actually. Do you want to deal with them one by one? Do you think, is the self-left an extension of Milibandism?
So I was definitely a Milibandite, although I obviously now in retrospect recognise the flaws with that.
I also think the question doesn't specify which Miliband. This
is true, but I'm going to stick with the Ed. Yeah. And I saw a lot of Ed. It's unfortunate because I sort of, as a wonky person myself, I very much liked that he was a nerd and he was passionate about policy and seeing the intricacy of radical policy in action. Unfortunately, it led him often down a road of being a bit cautious and not being radical, when now in his brief, he's actually far more radical than people could have ascertained before. So I think it's trying to couple the radicalism he actually had with a leadership that allows us to be radical. So I knew of him, and I knew him quite personally, and I knew he was always very radical, but he wasn't in a position where he had the consent to be so in public. And if you are in a position where you have really strong leadership, then you get the consent from the public and from the party to enact that radicalism. So hopefully, sort of the intricate radicalism of the Green New Deal, say, will come to fruition. But you certainly, unfortunately, in retrospect, obviously need a stronger leader, a stronger advocate for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would sort of echo what Jade says as well. And I think I know that self-left is sometimes tied up with Milibandism, but you need to remember that it's not actually something that new. I mean, I know it seems, the way it's being expressed through Twitter and stuff seems quite new, but actually it's been around for a while. I know that we will be having our other panelists join on, so I do apologise if we sort of get interrupted whilst Jade is speaking. If they sort of go on, they'll have to listen, their punishment for being late. But a question has just come through on the questions and answer that I think ties in with the second part of the other question, which is the previous question I asked you about the sentiment that a lot of Labour members would define themselves as self-left, but the group is unorganisable. And someone's added a question which I think is really similar to that, which is, if the self-left sort of is the silent majority of the membership. Oh, Ralph has just joined in, so I might go back to the start of that question and then sort of put it to the both of you. Hi, Ralph. As I said before, Ralph is the outgoing secretary of the Open Labour Committee and has been involved in, you're on mute, Ralph, by the way, has been involved in various different projects across the self-left for a really long time, has been a really great voice. Sorry, no mean to be offensive when I say for a long time. I mean longer than I have.
No. It's fine. It's a good time, and yes, I know I'm not going to be secretary next year, but we've got to the point where we've achieved an amazing number of things in a year, and there's always plenty of things to be done. So don't worry about me. I think it's a really good discussion to have. So happy to join in. I just had to go to my ward. I'm the only one who knows how to do Zoom in my ward. I've got one of those odd wards that's full of working class people living in the real world who come back from work and then want to log on to Zoom and stuff like that. We don't seem to have loads of people who've, we're just getting back out there and worried about we're only a few miles from Cleckheaton, you see, the ward I represent, where there's been an outbreak at a meat factory. So, okay.
I mean, you're lucky that your ward's meeting. Mine meets about twice a year, even before this. But, yeah. Anyway, just before you joined on, I was in the middle of sort of putting a question, but I think it's quite a good one that I'll put to both of you. I might start with Ralph then, so that Jade can have a little moment. She's answering quite a bit. So there are two questions that sort of overlap. One is, what weight would you give to the sentiment that the majority of Labour members define themselves as soft left, but the group isn't organisable? And then another question, which is kind of similar, which is, if the soft left is the majority of the membership, or the silent majority, then why has it been less organised than other factions until now? Or do you think it has been less organised? What do you think?
I think people have actually got a little bit fed up of other people defining their politics for them. It's something that rankles with me. In terminology, I think most people would I don't know many people except being described as on the right. I know I'm not from the views I have, but I actually don't have a problem with people have a view to the right of me on some issues and others. And I think this period we've been through, where everybody's been subject to other people defining them as a Blairite, red toy scum, or you're not this or you're not that. I think you're right. Most people are somewhere on the broadly plural left. I like the term plural because it means that you can have differences, you can be variegated, you might be liberal on one issue and you might be relatively authoritarian. We can all do the Venn diagrams. There's a historical thing over time that that current has formed around issues and come together, but actually historically last time it broke apart, thought it had done the job, and allowed much of its legacy to get taken over by people who were genuinely of the right of the party, which brought in outsourcing, the mayoral model in local government, some of the things that we're now battling with. And I did a blog that sort of reflected that. So we have tended to think that ideas matter more than organisation, and ideas have just triumphed quite nicely. Well, the good case has come. But I think our weakness at times is we've actually believed in our ideas, and sometimes organisation is something that you need to have. But I think there's a bit of I think people are a bit fed up of the sectarianism of labels, that you might call it. And I think Keir Starmer's campaign captured that. I supported Lisa, as did Jade at that conversation. But one thing he captured very well was people wanted there to be a broad church. They wanted it to be feel different, and they wanted to. And this is where I think the soft left can lead by example, is to lead by behaviours, lead by taking safeguarding, tackle the internet abuse, deal with all the equalities issues in a reasoned, calm and sensible way, and also be fairly sociable. Because we all join parties, partly because we all want to meet people. I mean, I went to London in the 80s, I met people, lifelong friends like Neil Nerva and others, and I met people, and it's formed part of who I am. In the last few years, I've got my daughter and others have experienced the rough end of this last 4 years of harsh and quite binary politics, where people are tested out to see where you're at on certain issues. So my feeling is you're right. We haven't really been strong on organisation, and I think this is another cycle where the what you might call the soft left, the plural or the open left, has captured the ideas of the moment and shaped some of the politics. My reflection on the last time this happened is we thought that the ideas were enough, and the lesson of history is the ideas are not enough, because we actually achieved a lot of things and then got trampled over by, I mean, people go on about parachutes from the centre over the last 4 years. You want to have been around in the noughties, in the 2000s, when, you know, if you question public finance initiative, private finance initiatives and things like that, you were virtually frozen out. You might not even get on a parliamentary panel. So one of the recurring themes is how centralism can be used in the party to a negative way. So I think we've achieved some really great things last year, and I think we're back at that point where we were a number of years, well over 10 years ago, where we could actually begin to organise better to make sure that we don't have our legacy squandered in terms of having achieved a better politics. You've constantly got to do it. It's not a job you've done. We haven't just finished the job yet. It's a constant thing. There's a Gramsci quote somewhere, but I've run out of them.
There's always a Gramsci quote. As you can all see, we have been joined by Alex Sobel, who is MP for Leeds Northwest and also on the current Open Labour Exec Committee. I think this is possibly a good one to start you off with, Alex. I know you've just joined, but we were asked a question by how the soft left are sometimes seen as the silent majority amongst the membership, but it hasn't organised as much, or perhaps might be unorganisable. What are your thoughts on that? And I mean, I think STV and the recent sort of success about STV could play into that as well. Building on Ralph's idea that sometimes it's been more about the ideas than the organising, and in introducing STV could change the way organising works, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, in the narrow spectrum of the NEC, that's true. I think there's probably 3 points here. One is around the sort of two-campism of the Labour Party. Two-campism of the Labour Party says you're either on the right or the left. That's your choice. Get off the fence on one side.
That's right.
You sat on the fence, you're in the soft left, and you're either a willing lackey of the right or the left, depending on your perspective. The right say of the left, and the left say of the right. And that's the problem, and it is a problem of the last 35 to 40 years, which is quite a long time, because there has not been an organisation of the soft left, and it was right. So in the 90s, as Ralph pointed out, in the noughties, it was right that the soft left organised with the left, for the NEC CLJ, because the right was one so dominant and two so bloody right wing that the soft left bit with the left, and the whole of the left, broad left, the Labour Party was very small. I used to go to meetings with, at conference, and there was like 30 of us in the room, and, John Landsman, Pete Wilsman were like two of the other people that I knew. Literally, I just knew them because I saw them once a year at conference. That's how I knew them, for years. And that was how it was. But things are very different now. I think secondly, it's this defining thing. So one, like, we all hate the term soft left, but we all use it because people have an understanding of what it is. And so in Open Labour, which I think to say now, I mean, actually my view is that Open Labour was the de facto organisation of the soft left since we started, because there was, it's a bit like saying, well, we're going to start a new football league. Oh, well, who's in this football league? We're the only team in it. So we are the football league, because there was nobody else. But it's about how defining that. And the golden thread really through Open Labour and through the soft left now isn't what it was 35 to 40 years. The golden thread is democracy. Everybody else has left the field of democracy. The right were never in the field of democracy. The right were always in the field of winning. Yep. But CLPD tried to be in the field and leave the left, we're Democrat, and they were always very good at it, and they were losing. If they were losing, it's all about democracy. When they were winning, forget democracy. They flipped their position on OMOB at least 3 times historically.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah?
Because they supported OMOB when it favoured them.
Yep.
And then they ditched it when it didn't. And the challenge for Open Labour and I don't think any of the new committee are on this call, but the challenge is never to abandon democracy. And so when we have, even though it can drive you mad, so like an example is when we had the leadership election earlier this year, we decided to have a ballot, whether to have a ballot to endorse a candidate. So even like to go to the step of endorsing, we decided we had to have member democracy. I was just like, we should just go straight to the endorsement. I recognised that my view was wrong. I was in the minority then, and the majority were right, and it was a good thing we did that ballot. This time, actually, the NEC, we had a couple of people on social media saying, well, where's the ballot about whether you should endorse the NEC or not? And 1 or 2 members of the committee gently pointed out to them, we had 8 days to sort this out. And so having 3 ballots or whatever wasn't really going to help us very much, and also find candidates. So the golden thread is democracy, but we need to have lots of other things. So the next, and I'll finish with this point. So the next real thing, the next real challenge actually, the next real dividing lines, because I talked about two campism, is international policy,
Yep.
where the left, the non-internationalist left, and about 2/3 of them are part of the CLJ select for the NEC, because everything is going to be in the context of the NEC, isn't it, at the moment, are of that ilk. And then there's the internationalist left.
Yeah.
And we are on the internationalist left. Then there's the right, who are sort of pro-Washington, pro-nuclear weapons, etc. So they've got a much more traditional NATOized view of foreign policy, defence-led foreign policy. So and I know Jade's on the call, but I think that we've got a lot of friends and allies in Parliament who've got our vision. I think that the piece last weekend by Lisa Nandy about Palestine, that is what our view of international foreign policy should be. And I think Lisa's view is that view, and that's also why we endorsed her for the leadership. And hopefully that doesn't mean she'll get moved, because I've just said that. But and then just like on the organisation thing, we need to be organised. And the last thing I say, because the NEC is, there's also a lot of talk about so which side are Open Labour going to go on the NEC? That's it. There's no we pick 4 candidates. Those are our candidates. That's what we vote for. That's what we campaign for. There is no big debate now about, are you supporting the CLJ or Labour to win? No. This is our slate. These are our people. We've decided democratically. Who chose these other people democratically? Nobody. So we need to have a line, and we need to have discipline, because we've done our democracy, and now we need to push that democracy into the party by supporting those 4 people and getting them elected to the NEC. And we need to say to people, if you support these 4 people, or even if you don't support all 4 of them, you support some of them, and you want to see them on the NEC, then you should also take a step and join Open Labour.
Very good.
Excellent. Do you have anything to add? Ralph and Alex sort of covered a lot of ground there. Do you have anything to add on the organising point?
Yeah, so I have the perspective of the last campaign, the leadership campaign. I found it quite interesting that the majority of people I spoke to who weren't voting for, say, the left candidate as it was, they never wanted a change from the economic radicalism that came before. That was set in stone. That was a consensus that had formed and was unbreakable at that moment. They just had different ways in which they thought it would happen. So a lot of them were concerned about electionism. They were just worried that we wouldn't win an election. They didn't want to change radicalism, and I think that's quite important. It's just one of the biggest differences I see in terms of the soft left I've always seen is the strategy in which we communicate, and alongside what everyone else has said, it's also the radicalism is there. It's how we talk about the radicalism, including, in fact, I'm doing it a bit wrong here, not calling it radicalism, because a lot of the things we talk about are not actually that radical, they are common sense. So it is just acknowledging how we communicate to the outside world as well, that I would add to sort of what defines the soft left.
I like that.
Cool. I'll go through, we have another question, and I'll start with, I'll go backwards and start with, actually, let's start with Ralph. Someone's asked about, because I'm not sure, are you a Fabian member, Ralph?
I have been, I'm not at the moment. I have.
Oh, okay. Because someone's asked a question here that there seems to be some linkage between Open Labour and the Fabians, and what is the relationship? I mean, I know there is a bit of overlap from members that I know, and I know I'm a overlapper myself, but
I don't. This will depend where you are and what happens in your locality. I mean, my wife's a member of the Fabians, so I don't need to be in a sense. My sister-in-law's been active and was general secretary of the Fabians, Glenys Thornton. But it's the thinking left bit. Let's go back to the thinking bit. The thing I see in the Fabians is some great stuff where you can convene meetings in almost like Chatham House rules to have proper discussions about policy. I think we need more of that. I think that they do more of that than we do in Open Labour, but we do some of it. So they connect, but some people will be active in SERA. some people will be active in all three, and some of it just, look, one of the things I found in the last few years is a lot of people have needed to find safe spaces. I can't emphasize it enough. Bradford and other places, you know, there's been some, politics has not been an easy ride, and where there have been places like Fabian societies, and we did try and set one up, but it never got going, was because people wanted to get out of the constituency factionalism and find somewhere to talk about politics. I found Open Labour in West Yorkshire, but that's one of the reasons I thought Open Labour was quite a good idea. But I've got a lot of time for the Fabians. I think it's a great thing. I'll probably, as a result of this, probably rejoin.
Excellent. What about you, Jade? Are you a member of the Fabians? I feel like
I've just gone somewhere. Yeah, I think I am. I have been for a while, and I think the biggest commonality is that we're both quite wonky. I can't tell if that's good or bad, but certainly in the sense that the sheer obsession with sort of policy detail, which I've always thought was a good thing. And yeah, I've always found the Fabians to obviously produce enormous amounts of good pamphlets at the very least. And yeah, I think the attention to detail in policy analysis has always been something we share in common.
Yeah, like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I find as well. I mean, I'm still a member of the Fabians, not as active maybe as I used to be. But I think there's also something about the sort of the Fabians sort of try to be as open church as well, and that you can sort of talk about things from different perspectives. It could sometimes be a bit easier to find a home there. I think, like what Ralph said, talking about policy rather than organising, which I find could be like a breath of fresh air sometimes. And then I suppose the soft left does a bit of both. But I mean, the Fabians have an overlap with quite a few because they don't ever endorse candidates. They're not factional. I know they're seen as being linked to various wings of the party at various different times, but it's somewhere that you can sort of join because you're not going to be organising, I suppose. Alex, what about you? Do you have any comments about links between Open Labour and the Fabians, or the soft left Fabians?
Full disclosure, I was on the Fabians for 2 years between 2012 and 2014, so I know Fabians very well. I was when Andy Harrop started, that's when I joined the committee. And so I think there's a broader thing here, like the Fabians and all the socialist side have basically, the Fabians are a little bit different to the other social societies, have to be broad because they're non-factional organisations. So obviously the Fabians promote certain ideas and different ideas at different times, but they also promote debate. So you'll often have, even in pamphlets with different authors, slightly conflicting or different views being portrayed in the same pamphlet or by the Fabians in different pamphlets at similar time periods. But the sort of common thread for the Fabians is that Fabians is a gradualist democratic socialist organisation. That's what it says in the tin. I think there is a big overlap with Open Labour. I think generally we're a little bit more uneasy with the gradualism. So we like it to be much quicker than democratic socialism. But I suppose the Fabians won't go, well, we had this idea, we wanted it to happen 20 years from now, but you've pushed it and the Labour leadership adopted it, but we're not very happy about that. I can't imagine that would be a Fabian circumstance if we happy it's happening. But I think that you know, my critique of the Fabians when I was on the exec was, I remember we had one SOC exec in a conference, and I said we should take a side on. I can't remember what it was. It was back to me, and there was very strong pushback. And the Fabians doesn't take sides. Fabians doesn't take positions. Fabians doesn't. I mean, I'm not even sure the Fabians. It might have changed, but the Fabians didn't even send conference delegates back then, because the act of voting at conference would be seen as factional. So I think that is the main issue. Open Labour effectively can't become a socialist society because we haven't so far, but we could potentially exclude people on the basis of politics, and you know that would breach the sort of compact that you have a social society. Also, you can't really run an internal social societies nominate. They can't really run slates and things like that, and which we're clearly doing in this NEC election. So, you know, so there are some dividing lines. I think, you know, Open Labour is more political.
Yeah, sort of similar to what Jade was saying at the start of the call as well, when she was sort of saying what she thought of the soft left and how she would describe it. Next question is one, I don't know how much time we'll be able to spend on it. It's a bit sort of get out your crystal balls. So having just announced the endorsements for the NEC elections, what do the panel think are Open Labour's chances? I don't really know who to start with.
I'll take it. It's really simple. It's a really simple answer.
You want to go? Okay.
Read my lips. All four candidates. All four candidates. This is like, you know, if you read actually really interestingly under the Labourlist comments yesterday, people debating all the different slates, and a number of people said, oh, Open Labour understand how this works. That's why they're putting two candidates up. And the other, you know, the other slate's putting all these candidates up. Well, that clearly isn't how STV works. And then we've put up, you know, we've got two other, you know, credible candidates in Alice Perry, who came top of the councillors section last time, and George Linders Hammond for the disability place. So I say all four candidates, and four out of an NEC of four, it'll be 39 or 40 people, isn't a lot.
I completely agree with that. And actually, the irony of it, Alex mentioned earlier, the CLPD and others used to demand STV under the what we call the Blair years. The irony of it is STV that will save some of those people having some seats on the NEC, is my view, in the next time, that when we get past to the results of this, the only reason that some of those people will still be there is because we changed the system to STV. Politics is full of little ironies, isn't it?
I'd agree. I think they're all really good candidates and very strong. They all have a profile or definitely have the potential to grow it. I see nothing but optimism in that slate. Absolutely.
Cool. The next question that's come through is a bit wide, but I presume is sort of focused on NEC type arguments, which is, has there been any concern in Open Labour about the Labour to Win umbrella, which has captured some of the soft left thinkers in addition to Progress and Labour First? And what are your thoughts about sort of broader umbrellas? I suppose they're sort of asking, are we worried that something like Labour to Win will eat us up? I mean, I'm not really getting that feeling, but Ralph, do you want to start?
I think it's an interesting point. I think there's always going to be some people who get involved with some of these new initiatives, and I think you shouldn't underestimate how tactically adept and creative some of those people to the right of us are. They've waited a long time, some of them very creative with their organisation, but also there are members out there who hold those views, and we've never been about capturing the flag with 52% and letting the 48% go to anyway. So I think it's going to be an interesting one. I think that the risk to our current of politics could be more from the right than the hard left, or whatever you want to call them. Yes, I think that's a good point. That's one I'm thinking through at the moment, because that's what happened last time.
Jade, do you want to come in?
I think only if people don't realise that Labour to Win are Progress and Labour First, right? I don't think there is actually significant overlap in that respect, bar maybe a few. So I don't, if it is any sort of overlap, it's very minimal. I think it's a matter of identity. It's that choice, but I think the soft left and Open Labour has defined itself enough that that overlap isn't that significant now. It might have been before, but I don't think it is now.
Alex, do you have anything to add in?
I think the reality is we've got four blocks, haven't we? Because a new block has entered as well as Open Labour. So you've got Progress and Labour First, which, you know, have created the name, but they've always ran like that. There hasn't been any election where they've run separately. They've run together ever since the MPs could stop running. Before that, you know, Robin Cook used to come top, which we'd like to celebrate in Open Labour. So, you know, and then you've got CLJ, obviously, which, you know, look like it might have been 2 blocks, but is a single block. Then you've got Open Labour's 2 candidates. And then you've got the Tribune group of MPs.
Yeah.
Now, so what's interesting about Labour to win is they're running 6 candidates, which is like at least 2 candidates too many. But they've then also endorsed 2 of the Tribune former MPs and Anne Black, who's obviously Open Labour candidate after we endorsed her today through the ballot. So there is a bit of a lean of Labour to win towards Open Labour. There is no expectation of lean the other way, because we want to concentrate our top 2 preferences in our top 2 candidates. And actually, because we've got breadth, some people in Open Labour will want a preference, other people 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and other people other 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And actually, you know, from an organisational point of view, we shouldn't really be getting too much of a game of, well, we need to design, you know, 16 preferences for Open Labour members to vote, because actually we'll lose the goodwill of our members, because they didn't join to get told in a really disciplinary way, you know, like the Labour First candidate, exactly how they should vote. I think there'll be an understanding, these are the Open Labour candidates. And actually, I think that will go beyond the people who actually pay us money, to sort of broader range of people who are sympathetic. But I don't think there'll be, you know, the idea of taking a line either way. So I don't think that there's not been any formal talks or anything. There's, you know, there's always the chatter on social media, and Luke Akers loves the chatter on social media. But, you know, I think that the concentration will be on you know, Anne 1, Germain 2, or Germain 1 and 2, whichever way it works out. And then after that, people can do what they like.
Cool. So there are no more questions through from the attendees. Please do send through your questions on the little Q&A. I'd just like to sort of go back a little bit. I know I might be covering some ground again with Jade, but just we don't have questions through. I mean, I think this is an interesting question, and also if no more questions come through, could be a good one to wind up on, which is going back to the question about what the defining elements of the soft left is. What was the exact wording of the question? Yeah, what is the defining factor of the soft left, or does it have one? I think you've all sort of touched of it whilst you were sort of chatting, but I think as we're sort of coming up to 8 o'clock, unless any great questions come in, I think it might be a good one to go round and have you all and whilst you're doing it, maybe answer this last one that just comes through. So basically, what do you think defines the soft left? I might start with Jade, and you can sort of summarize what you were saying earlier, because I thought it was great. And what do you think the soft left is? Do you think Keir Starmer's a soft left leader? And maybe sort of finish up with where do you see the soft left going?
Ooh, okay. So as I said before, I think it's, to be quick fire, parliamentary socialism, internationalism, and pluralism, if I were to define the soft left. Do I think Keir's soft left? I think he doesn't come from a factional background. He comes from like an organizational background. It would be up to him to define what the future is. I hope that our platform going forward is radical and it wins, but that's up to him to define. What was the last one?
Where do you think the soft left is going? Or where would you like it to go? Do you think that's lining up with where it's going?
Winning on the NEC.
Who wants to come in next, sort of dealing with those three, finding the soft left, is Keir soft left, and where are we going?
Okay, I'll chip in. I'd agree with plural democratic. I'd say less hierarchical, non-centralist. I think one of the defining bits on the left is those who operate a centralist top-down view, and those who are less hierarchical, perhaps. And I think that would be Open Labour. Is Keir, I think aspects of him could be, but I think, yeah, Jade more or less had it. Where do I think we're going to go? I think we need to, at some point, recognise that we're not going to be all things fluffy and wonderful to everybody, and that we need to hold on to some things that are actually fundamental that other people, we've had some easy wins, we've done well, The real challenge is to not do what happened last time, which is to melt into the background and think that by being wonderful, intelligent, full of good ideas, you're immediately going to change the world. You're going to have to stick at some very difficult things for some time. One of those for me is a commitment to electoral reform. And these are things that I've been pushing for 30 or more years, as Alex knows. The lesson from the last time is don't just melt away thinking job's done and it's all going to be life and profit. You've got to be looking at what your next objective is, and you've got to recognize there will be times when you'll lose, and sometimes your alliances will shift and they will be different, but we need to be distinctive and principled.
When I move to Alex, can I add, when you're dealing with the last bit, can you also deal with the question that's just come through of, do you see us standing candidates? So when you're answering, can you sort of incorporate and answer that? Well.
So I'll agree with everything Jade and Ralph said, and I'll add to it. And it's really important. Wedges are really important. So to understand what the soft left is, you need to say this is a wedge issue, the right and the far left or whatever, orthodox. I like using orthodox left now. That's a better way of describing the left of the party, to the left of Open Labour. I think that that three things I'd say is, one is about ownership. So how should the economy and society be structured, and how should ownership operate? So a market should exist for the exchange of goods, but the actors in that market shouldn't be owned by capital, by shareholding capital. Yeah, but neither should the state own everything, right? So we should have a market where citizens, workers own the actors that operate in the market. And that would be like, if I was going to describe the open left, that would be the economic model we'd follow. Housing, right? So housing is a big issue. Housing inequality in this country is massive. So should landlordism exist? Should people own more than one property and rent it to others? No. Should the state own property and rent it out? Yes. Should citizens cooperatively own it, or some more democratic version of housing associations? Yeah. But should citizens also be able to own their own property? Yes. So that might be a divine line between where the orthodox left might say, actually, there should be no property. I'm not sure they're quite prude on that. I'm not sure, property is theft. And then on the other side, there might be this very like landlords play a useful role in society. It's people's pensions and all of that, which is just people should just have. So there's a wedge. And then I think the other one is a bit more complicated to explain is probably around equality. And obviously I mean economic equality, but I mean all the other forms of intersectional equality as well. And the open left should always be at the forefront of those. And I think we have been, and sometimes it is challenging, and challenging people have to work through it. And actually, but there's also the approach to it, where we don't cast people down a well for saying the wrong thing, but we try and work through a process of understanding, support, education, etc. And I won't get into more detail than that, because that'll probably get me thrown down a well. So, and then your last two questions are so first of all, you can only really judge a leadership looking backwards. So I'm a shadow minister and bound by collective responsibility. So what I would say is, looking back at Ed Miliband's leadership, was not a soft leadership. It was a soft left candidacy, a soft left leadership campaign, but the actual leadership failed to be. And by that benchmark, we should judge Keir Starmer looking backwards. So, and then the last one from I think it's from Henry Mendoza. Hi, Henry. So, so one, there's the whole principle, the whole framing of the question, and Henry, I don't think he minds me outing him, is an Open Labour member. The whole framing of the question isn't very Open Labour. So, Open Labour standing candidates. Open Labour doesn't stand candidates. Open Labour democratically decides who to support out of the candidates who should stand. Now, a slightly different question. Should Open Labour members of Parliament stand to be leader and deputy? Absolutely. Henry's asking me if I'm going to stand for leader and deputy, or Henry, you'll have to wait and see. And if I am, I hope you'll be on my campaign.
What about Ralph and Jade? Are you getting behind Alex for leader?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We need someone from the north.
All the way.
Anything else to add to, do you have any comments about the question about sort of running candidates in however you interpret it?
I think we've begun to redefine things a little bit better. The one thing that's really stood us out in the last few months has been the internal democracy and demonstrating, and it's really stark in these last few days, that we've been able to turn around democratic processes that other people are saying cannot be done. And so instead of the old model of committees telling the members what they should do, we have we've turned it upside down. We've got the members. The committee asks the members to choose, and the members will say, we've found a way of doing that. For many people, that's what they think democratic socialism is. This whole business of the line, the Leninist way of thinking, democratic centralism, which infuses elements of the further left. I call them the authoritarian left because they are authoritarian, objectively, at home and abroad. So what we've done is we've created that space where you can actually stand up. You can be guided, you can be participative, and that's like the mutuals and the cooperative model that Alex is talking. There's a phrase I always hate: do I want to live under socialism? No, I don't. I want to be part of it.
I mean, I'd agree with both of them, especially on Alex's point about ownership and Ralph's on sort of participative. In terms of candidates, yeah, it's all about endorsing them about how they live up to those values, especially of not just ownership, of course, of models of the economy, but again, it can be taken into the organisation. It's ownership of who you get to choose, and again, sort of being able to shape that line, and that reinforces us. I liked what Alex said earlier about having a ballot to have a ballot. I think that's very open labour, and it may take a while, but
there's a t-shirt there.
It wouldn't be open labour without it. So yeah, endorsements rather than candidates. Exactly.
I think what makes that even better is not only did we have a ballot to have a ballot, the Open Labour Committee had a vote amongst the committee about whether to ballot the members about having a ballot. So there was another democratic step before democracy all over the place.
We're the Quakers of the left.
Yeah, so I think we were wanting to wind up around 8, so we're dealing with great time. There is just one final question that's come through, so it's quite quick. And obviously, if any of the panelists were sort of wanting to ask each other anything, I know you all sort of know each other, but if you want to ask each other anything sort of in this panel, or if you've anything you want to say. So closing remarks, and so no more, don't send through any more questions because we're doing, unless there's something really burning and can be answered quickly. Closing remarks, and to answer the question, if you could wave a wand and get everyone to stop using the term soft left, what would you replace it with? I'll start with, I don't think Ralph started for a while. Unless
okay.
I start with closing remarks and replacing?
Well, closing remarks, we're hopefully providing a way of making politics a safer space, a more involving space. Quiz nights and things are also fun. And I think there's a little bit of that walk the talk, demonstrate by your behaviours what your politics are. And I would settle on a very simple formula, 2 words: democratic left.
Cool. Alex or Jade, either of you want to jump in?
Just that you took it. That's exactly what I was going to say. Democratic left would be, it would be in every level in the economy and in open labour itself. Democratic left is a very succinct, perfect way of describing it. Absolutely.
And I don't think it's a bad thing that there's some sort of consensus, as obviously we'd need consensus before we ever changed it. Alex, what about you? Closing
remarks. Yeah, I think a lot of people who joined the Labour Party, certainly me, had a vision of what they thought the inside of the Labour Party would look like. And it was a sort of vision of sort of empowering experience where your ideas and values could travel through the party with like-minded people, and that your voice and your views would be valued and you'd have a say. And I think that's what we're offering an open Labour, and that is what we want the Labour Party to be, and so that's what we're fighting for, you know, and we're fighting it with the, you know, the sword of democracy and the shield of fairness. I think that is how I'd looking at old-fashioned terms, but I think I'll slightly disagree about the framing. My framing has been for the last 2 to 3 years is open left, and I think that is obviously very similar to democratic left, but also it does give us a bit of organisational shape, because the name's similar. So.
Fair enough. Okay, well, unless anyone has any further comments, can't see anything. I will start winding up. Thank you to everyone who's on the chat, to everyone who's asked questions. Thank you to everyone watching on Facebook Live and to everyone who catches up with it later. Thank you very much to Leon for arranging this and inviting me to chair, and to Adam, who's chair of the Young Fabians, for his excellent tech support. I know the Young Fabians are non-factional, so we can't do any advertising here, but Open Labour holds a lot of really great events, and it'd be great if you wanted to come along, and no pressure. If you wanted to join Open Labour, that would be something that would be fine, whilst I'm not officially advertising. But yeah, so I think we're all done now. If our wonderful tech support is ready to end broadcasting.